George R. R. Martin, the creator of Game of Thrones, has opened his big fat mouth once again, and it's not about writing Winds of Winter. He's talking about new spinoff series. We're going to get into what the hell it all means, and we're going to talk about the long wait of Winds of Winter, the book that looks like it's never going to come out. We're going to do that right now on the Sundowners Club. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We've been on this long damn journey with you guys over the last few years since we started our channel. And just like the rest of the fans in Game of Thrones world, we're frustrated with the fact that George R. R. Martin has been involved in 100 projects, none of which seem to be getting Winds of Winter, the book, released. And so this gets to be a tiresome subject to cover. But once again, he showed up at a con, although he doesn't have a lot of time to spend, but he showed up in Iceland for a thing called Iceland Noir, and he spoke about the Game of Thrones spinoffs in development, and we're going to talk about what he said, what it means, and where things could go in a spinoff series based on George's comments. First of all, Sterling, man, we've been talking about this since we started our channel, and it gets to where you question even doing a video for an audience that has heard this 100 times, and it gets old. First of all, do you think he's ever going to do Winds of Winter and Dream of Spring? You think these books are ever going to come out?
I think at some point they will eventually. It sounds terrible to say it, but it could be after he passes. I know that sounds awful, but I gotta feel like he does have a plan ultimately to release the final stories and finish up the whole series at some point. But I just when that will be, I have no idea. Something leads me to believe that maybe because of the way the show was received, that maybe he rewrote some things. That's the only thing I could really explain why it's taken so long to get the next book out.
Yeah, we know he had a break from David and Dan, Dan Benioff and David Weiss, the two Ds for the showrunners for Game of Thrones. He had a break with them around season 5, and I think there was a combination of things that he didn't like the direction they were going, but he kind of kept quiet at the time. We didn't really know it. He wasn't as vocal as he's been with Ryan Condal in House of the Dragon season 2, but he had a split. He kind of left and said he was focusing on the books, and as they passed him, the story of the resurrection of Jon Snow was where the books left off. Is when we left off in the last book, Jon Snow has been killed. He's laying on the floor and or laying on the ground outside Castle Black, and he's dying dead. And we picked that up in the show in season 6 with the resurrection of Jon on the show. And so that's where he officially they passed the books. But it didn't get a lot of play at the time. But I do believe that once he saw the reaction, he could say all day long that fans' reaction doesn't necessarily change the end of your story. You've got a beginning, middle, and end, and you have to stick to it. He said that repeatedly, but I don't buy for one second that he hasn't gone back and looked at the reaction fans had and scrapped some things that he had for Winds of Winter, because there were times when he said he had a certain number of pages written, and then he went back a year later and said that he had less than that. And so he's obviously scrapped a lot of the book and started over. But let's talk about what he said in this event that happened in Reykjavik, Iceland, at Iceland Noir. According to the Spanish Game of Thrones fan site Los Siete Reinos, they were in attendance and recorded what he said. Also, go check out winterscoming.net. It's a great site that covers all things Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, Night of the Seven Kingdoms. It even gets into things like other sci-fi and fantasy shows and content. So really great site. So I want to credit them. But in attendance, they recorded his comments, and here's what he said. He said, aside from Night of the Seven Kingdoms and House of the Dragon, there are other Game of Thrones spin-off projects in development. Most are prequels. There are several in development, 5 or 6 series, and I'm not developing them alone. I'm working with other people. Yes, there are some sequels. So that was news when he said, yes, there are sequels. So let's get into it right now. One, should there be a sequel to season 8 of Game of Thrones? And what is your take on that? Should there be? Should they leave it alone, or should they do a sequel?
I think there should absolutely be a sequel. I mean, if you can't redo the series, then there needs to be a sequel. I think they've set up a bunch of things, even in the prequel series.
Yeah, with the prophecy.
Yeah, and the events that we know, those really weren't that big of a deal. I mean, they talk about the long night. I mean, that's one episode in the final season that gets resolved. That's not anything that special, honestly.
It's like they built it up in the show. Even though in the books there is no Night King, at least not yet. There's the others, but in the show there was the Night King, and it built up, and then you get to the Battle of Winterfell, and boom, he's gone. It's over, and it always felt incomplete. And then you get to House of the Dragon, and there's this constant talk with Viserys and Rhaenyra, and then Rhaenyra and Jace around prophecy, and passing down from Aegon's dream.
Feels all irrelevant how things have played out,
unless it's not the end of the real long night. And so, for me, I agree with you. You're not going to retcon in a traditional sense. There was a petition to redo season 8. That was never going to happen, although a ton of people signed up for that. But what you can do is you can continue the series and have season 8 not be the end. And for me, I think going the direction of a spin-off series with Jon Snow in the North makes no sense. First of all, a lot of these actors have proven over the years that they can be supporting characters in movies and in TV shows, but they're not stars anymore. Their stardom was around Game of Thrones. And look no further than The Family Plan 2 with Mark Wahlberg and Michelle Monaghan, and the guy playing the bad in that, which is only released on Apple TV, is Kit Harington. So I don't buy for 1 second that they would go down the road of an Arya where she's not in Westeros at all and her voyages, or Jon Snow in the North. Yeah, I think
he still needs to be a central part of the story, though. He's still the most important piece.
And that's where I would go with it. I would say one of the biggest mysteries of Game of Thrones was around Craster. And Craster sacrificing or giving the babies, Craster's babies, to the Night King. And so why does that stand out?
And that led to nothing.
Right? It led to nothing. And so we know that people die and the Night King resurrects the dead, the army of the dead. And when he was taken out by Arya, all the dead fell. So anything that was dead, that was risen, fell in that moment. But keep in mind, Craster's babies, or the baby that we saw that the Night King touched on his cheek and his eyes turned blue, that was not a dead being. That was a living being. So I feel like that's a good place to start, which is what happens north, where we have Tormund and we have Jon, knowing that this is not over. And you also get into what's going on with Bran as the king, what's going on with Gendry over the Stormlands, what's going on with Sansa in Winterfell. And you bring all these characters back, and you take us back to Westeros as people are going about their lives now that Bran has taken over as king. The Iron Throne is gone, but he is the ruler over the 6 kingdoms, and as Winterfell has its independence now, or the North does. So I think that would be the place to start, where you bring back these characters, and the majority of them that people love, and now you don't have the pressure on one actor or one character to carry the show. And it gives you a chance to do what I would call a back-end correction instead of a traditional retcon. And then the debate will start. Do you have Daenerys being resurrected in Volantis with the Red Priestesses? What happens with Drogon? Those are all things that can be debated. But I think the one logical way to go, in my opinion, is around the long night and the bigger battle to come. Now that people think that they've gotten through this thing, and with Craster's babies, there's a linkage there to be able to do that, and that would tie better into what House of the Dragon has covered around the prophecy, and how sometimes the message can get changed right throughout generations. Things get told differently, and so you sometimes you read the prophecy wrong, and so I think that's fascinating. That's where I would go with it. Do you have any other thoughts around if they do a sequel series? Something that maybe we haven't mentioned, or a pathway they could go down. Should it be 6 months to a year later? Should it be 10 years later? What are your thoughts around where they should go with it from a time frame standpoint, and maybe some other characters?
I think you would do it shortly after. I mean, you can't bring back Daenerys and then it be 10 years later.
Right.
That doesn't really make sense.
So if she comes back, it would have to be soon.
It'd have to be pretty recent. But to me,
a la Jon Snow, right? Jon got brought back within a couple of days.
Right. Yeah. Right. So I mean, but for me though, it's crucial. I think for the success of the franchise. This is a similar problem that Star Wars kind of has, is that it's hard to care about prequel series when the most recent event has just been completely destroyed. No one cares about it. You've dropped the ball on the latest event, that people don't really care about prequel events when you haven't got your current events. When you just haven't done that right. You haven't brought those to a closure in a way that's satisfactory for most people.
Well,
and
we're gonna see with like Night of the Seven Kingdoms, what sort of ratings does that get? What sort of ratings does House of the Dragon season 3 get? Both of those are going to be launching in 2026. The first in January with the Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which is a whole different tone. Then you have House of the Dragon season 3, which will kick off with a bang.
House of the Dragon fell off a little bit, didn't it?
It did 10 to 15%. Not bad, but enough.
Usually but Game of Thrones grew every season.
And George R. R. Martin is not happy with House of the Dragon and the showrunner Ryan Condal and team. So, they don't really have his support. Even when he showed up and has done these events about Night of the Seven Kingdoms, he didn't mention House of the Dragon at all. So, it'll be interesting to see how all that plays out. But we wanted to talk about it. Again, I think the fans have been frustrated with George R. R. Martin. Every interview he gives, I don't think he can say the right thing at this point. I think it's a matter of you either putting Wins the Winner out or not. And I think this may be a sign that he's moving beyond the last 2 books. Because if he's working with HBO on a sequel series, then that has to be impacted by what he's got in his mind for how his books ended, or else he's not going to end them. So we're going to learn a little bit more as we get closer to.
There's a lot more money in this as well.
There is.
That's why he's doing what he's doing.
We got to close this with Warner Brothers, which owns HBO, is going to be sold, most likely to Paramount. And Paramount wants to be a big player in not only streaming and shows, but in video games and in theatrical releases. So don't think for one second that David Ellison and his leadership team at Paramount and Skydance don't want to look at the IPs, of which Game of Thrones is a big one, for theatrical releases of stuff like maybe Aegon the Conqueror, to video games, a la similar to Hogwarts Legacy, something like that. Why would they put a game out around that type of format? And then also the streaming series. And the biggest way to do that, to get the biggest bang for your buck, is to have a sequel to Game of Thrones. What do you think? There's a lot to digest. Some of it not so good, but some of it, the potential to be good. Give us your thoughts. Where should they go if they go with a sequel? Tell us in the comments where you think they should go if they're going to pick up from the events of Season 8. While you're doing that, smash that like button, share this video out with your friends, and most importantly, hit subscribe so we can grow our channel. And TCB, everyone.